Okay, it's 2:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining West Virginia Women Moving Forward. We are going to look at how women are making advancements in the Mountain State, and I couldn't think of a better person to moderate this wonderful panel than my friend at WVU, Rocky Goodwin. And so, Rocky, I'm going to toss it over to you today for right now, but thank you so much for joining and leading this conversation.
Thanks so much, Sarah. We really appreciate you and the rest of the organizers and sponsors of this conversation. We like to be last. We're going to leave you on a great note with this conversation and wrap up what I and everybody who has participated feels like was incredibly successful conversation to move our state forward and those communities forward. So as Sarah indicated, today we're going to talk about West Virginia women moving forward. And that doesn't mean we're talking about issues that are only for women to pay attention to. We know that with half of our workforce, an important part of our electorate, policymakers, caregivers, the issues that affect women actually are issues that affect families and communities in our state as a whole. So we have an all-star panel to talk to you today. I am so thrilled. I know each of them is incredibly busy right now. We've gotten them at the height of what they do in each case, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. I don't want to take much of the time away from these panelists because they are going to be fascinating and you're going to learn so much and be able to share and take away from this. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction here of who we've got to listen to today. And then I'm going to pass it on to our first speaker. So we've got planned for today a panelist who probably needs no introduction, our Secretary of State, who in an election year with lots of news and the 100th anniversary of suffrage for women has been very busy. And you've probably seen Secretary Warner somewhere around the state or in conversations like this. But we're going to hear first from you, Secretary, about how these elections transpired, the participation for both voter registration, going to the polls, understanding the dynamics there for elected officials. And then we're going to hear from Delegate Sammi Brown, who's an elected official herself, as well as breaking barriers in other ways. And can't wait to pass that off to Delegate Brown. We'll follow that up with Dr. Kari Law, who is a very busy time for Dr. Law, looking at treatment of mental health challenges and stressors in the time of COVID around the Mountain State. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with my dear friend, Priscila Santos, who is a fellow and has been working on a number of policy issues surrounding women moving forward and for our state over the past couple of years. But without further ado, let me pass the baton here to you, Secretary, and we will love to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure you'll set the tone for what will come after.
All right. Thank you so much, Rocky, and thanks to Sarah for organizing this Small Communities Big Solutions Conference. And we are right in the middle of this election, so there's been an awful lot of attention, and it remains. This is an ongoing and iterative process till we reach Inauguration Day in January. And so I'll be welcome to answer any questions people have as we go through, but I wanted to start really kind of looking back a little bit. We don't really know who we are unless we look at where we've come. And this is such a monumental occasion to celebrate the 100th anniversary. We're here in 2020, 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And I think people will have a hint that West Virginia really played a very, very key role in the passage of that amendment, because it was a 60 to 70 year struggle. This was not a foregone conclusion that women were going to get the right to vote. And when it finally came around and a certain number of states had passed it, they needed just a couple more, the shot clock was running out as to whether this was going to work or not. And there was a West Virginia State Senator, Jesse Block, who was actually vacationing in California when the vote came around. And the word went out that it was looking like it was going to be a tied vote or it may not pass. And so they sent the message to him, And he actually had to go through getting a plane flight, a train ride. It was quite the ordeal to get him back here in time. I think there was even a little bit of stalling to make sure that he got back here to be able to cast his vote. And when he did, West Virginia became the 24th state to pass the amendment. And then shortly thereafter, Tennessee became the last state. And had West Virginia not gone that route, it's doubtful that Tennessee and the other states would have. They would have seen this as a failed initiative. And the passage was just 15-14. I mean, a razor-thin vote. So it's one of those every vote matters. And it's a lesson for all of us to keep in mind as we go to participate in these elections. And so that's why we put such an emphasis here in West Virginia on the celebration of this 19th Amendment, the 100th anniversary. And there were a number of players involved that helped bring this to the fore, and it actually gained some national attention. West Virginia's efforts were perhaps more than any other state to celebrate that. And I know that I worked with an individual at the National Archives. They actually sent some posters and placards that described the 19th Amendment, the trials and tribulations to get the passage. And they were quite impressed. We were one of the first states that got these placards because of West Virginia's sincere involvement in celebrating that. And there were a number of folks that were involved in this effort around the state. First, credit goes out to WVU and Marshall working collaboratively. I know there was a nationally renowned speaker who came to Marshall and gave an excellent presentation on the history of the suffrage movement. But then other organizations were involved as well. The League of Women Voters, the West Virginia Women's Commission, the National Organization of Women, West Virginia's Girls State, the West Virginia Division of Arts, Culture, and History, and of course the Press Association was very engaged in making sure that this was publicized to celebrate West Virginia's role in the whole process. And so I take quite a lot of pride. I know that I had relatives involved in this back at the time, and it's kind of neat to see it, to be in this position that I happen to hold. And I'm very honored. I'm really enjoying this job as Secretary of State, and it's why I, take it so seriously, but also enjoy getting out around the state and talking to people and hearing their stories of how they or their ancestors were involved in this as well. Let me kind of move now to the current day and the pride that I have in the role of women in the political system here. And first, I'd like to pay tribute to, we are one of the few states that have both political parties headed by women. So Penny Biafore heads up, she's the chair of the Democrat Party here in West Virginia. And of course, Melody Potter is the chair of the Republican Party. So that's kind of a neat statement right there, that how much women are involved in the political process here in West Virginia. Both of those would have been chosen by their delegations to lead the various parties. Then, of course, we're familiar with the leadership of people such as Senator Shelley Moore Capito and Carol Miller in the 3rd Congressional District. Amy Summers is the majority leader in the House here in West Virginia. And a total of 17 women hold leadership positions in between the two houses. So that's kind of a mark that's out there that says anybody that wants to, a young girl in school learning about West Virginia history, the Golden Horse, and that sort of thing, now has a number of role models. It's no longer an aberration or an unusual thing. It's part of the normal leadership that we all recognize, the great talents and insights that women bring to the process. And that's why I encourage everybody who has any inclination whatsoever to look for a way to get involved in that political process. And there are a number of ways to do that. There's obviously working on campaigns, being active in the party, being a poll worker, or go ahead and make that step and step out there and run for office. It's there's nothing like it. Yes, there's a lot of push and pull sometimes, but there's nothing I think more rewarding than getting out there, stating what your beliefs are, and bringing your skill set. Every one of us has a different skill set or talent or life experience, and we need all of those in the political process for us to be effective as a state, and then to bring and represent the total body politic here in the state. Some quick numbers for you. Here in West Virginia, we have 1.2 million registered voters. Sounds like a lot, but when you really look around, let me start to break that down for you just a little bit. And about half of those are women. So since January of 2017, when I came into office, we have registered 235,000 new voters. And so that's about a fifth of the total number that are registered throughout the state. And that's an incredible number for a small state like West Virginia to register that many new voters. And what the point in here is that 62,000 of those are students that graduated in 2017, 18, 19. These are new voters who on November 3rd, voted in their first general election for president of the United States. So think of that, 62,000 brand new voters of high school age participated in this election, which contributed to this record turnout for us. We had 800,000. So again, back to this 1.2 million, 800,000 people voted in this election, 801,000 in fact. And if you actually subtract, there are about 200,000 inactive voters. Those are people who haven't participated in a number of elections leading up to this. So if you take those 200,000 away, you really have about 1 million active voters, 800,000 participated. That is a huge percentage. That gets right up there at the top of any state in the union. So if you've ever heard anything about West Virginia voters being apathetic, I would like to spell that right now. This election certainly showed otherwise. The only election in West Virginia history where more people voted was in 1960 when John Kennedy ran. And we actually had 50,000 more people, more residents in West Virginia in 1960 than we do today. That's an indication as to what's happened to West Virginia over the last 50 years. But that's why I think we should all be proud that many people participated in this election, because the more people that participate in an election, the more confidence that we have in those elected leaders. And now I think everybody that's been elected to office, especially the 17 women that have been elected to leadership positions, can move forward with confidence, knowing that they basically have a mandate from the people saying, yes, we wanted you in those positions, now go forth and do the state's business, and let's get this state economy moving and so forth. Here inside my office, my elections division is run by a woman, Brittany Westfall. So if you've ever thought, wow, they're doing a great job in the elections, I get credit for it. Brittany's the one behind the scenes doing the work. And so she has just done a fabulous job. She's been here for a number of years and heads up a very small division that has a very large mission, and she's doing a wonderful job at it. County clerks in West Virginia, we have 55 counties. 36 of those 55 county clerks are women, and they are the ones actually on the front line that are running those elections on a day-to-day basis. And so again, tribute goes to those individuals. We also had 1,708 precincts. Each one of those has 5 poll workers. Many of those are women. 9,000 poll workers came to work on election day. They actually got there at 5:30 in the morning, work until 7:30 at night, sometimes later than that. Long days, but again, all of that is the tribute goes to them for running these successful elections. I've talked about the total number of ballots cast. Some quick, just because this was such an aberration, such an unusual election, we had, let me see, it was 145,000 absentee ballots, and in a usual year, we only have 7,000. So think of that, it's 20 or 30 times the usual number. And those were all these not only the applications, but the ballots that had to be processed by these county clerks. So a monumental task. They did it, and we had election night results on election night, unlike other states where right now you still see counting going on in Georgia and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and other places. So we should be very proud of what we accomplished here in West Virginia. I'll be glad to go back if I don't want to run out of time here with just talking elections very quickly on some business, women in business. The business and licensing director has been here for over 30 years, is Penny Barker. Wealth of knowledge, and she just does a fabulous job. She's the one that's been the initiator and the one who's made our business one-stop go, as well as 2 business hubs throughout the state, which enable women to start businesses. We have 12,436 women-owned businesses registered in West Virginia. Kanawha County leads the way with women-owned businesses of 1,300 women-owned businesses. And I'd like to just note for everybody that we do waive annual registration fees for not only veterans, but people under the age of 30. So again, if you're a young woman looking to start a business, let us know. Come in, see the Business One Stop, call our office. We'll walk you through the process to get your business up and running. With that, let me see, 75 of our 145 businesses owned by young entrepreneurs are run by women. So again, more than half of the young people starting businesses today are women. With that, like I said, I'd like to save any time for questions or answer. I'll let you move on to the next speaker, but I'll stay tuned in for any questions people might have. Thank you, Rocky.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. That was really informative and inspiring. I know sometimes it feels like West Virginia gets put out there on national news in the not the best ways, but it's nice to know that we have some superlatives to be proud of and that we played our part in history. I think today is all about really thinking carefully and strategically about how we can continue to shape our future and write our next chapter, and knowing that we have this moment to be proud of in crafting a path forward for the suffrage rights for women helps us to know that we can do this in other big ways moving forward. And those participation numbers are out of sight. It's great to know that people are availing themselves of that process and being part of it. Does anybody on our panel, let me first invite, have any questions for the Secretary? I know, Secretary, that we are going to hear from Delegate Brown and Dr. Law and Priscila Santos on different facets of what participation in the political process can mean, whether it's being an elected official or seeing the policies and regulations that would cover anything from childcare to telemedicine, accurately represent what the different voices and different perspectives in our society are observing. And I know that making sure, and your invitation was a good one for us to understand, the chairs of both parties are women, and that there's really a welcome mat for people to not only become involved in the political process, but even to run for office. Have any words of advice? I know you kind of grinned when you said put yourself out there. Any further thoughts on a rough and tumble year where there's been a lot of division, and maybe it seems a little intimidating to go anywhere near politics for some people? Any thoughts on that?
Well, if anyone was paying attention to my race in particular, you saw it got somewhat nasty. You have to have somewhat of a thick skin. Sometimes it's difficult on family members or other people that know you. But that's part of the political process. It's the iron sharpens iron scenario from biblical, teachings and so forth. Is when you get two candidates, and that's the beauty of our democratic system here in the United States, is the two-party system has those two parties presenting ideas and then challenging each other in that, both from a political policy standpoint as well as individually. And then you just trust in the electorate and things that if there's truth to it, they take hold, and if not, then they get cast aside and so forth. So you truly learn who your friends are, and it's sometimes not who you think it is. And you learn to find the middle ground or find ways to work together with people. And I can go into lengthy detail if anybody's interested, perhaps in another scenario. But West Virginia's leading the nation with electronic voting, and it's a situation where I'm working with people on not only the other side of the political aisle, but actually people inside the Biden campaign. And you may think that awkward, how red West Virginia has become recently, and I'm a Republican, but to be working with the top leadership on the other side, because we have a common interest. It's not political, it's the democratic process. And that is, if we can look at how difficult it is to get our ballots cast through the absentee process, get things delivered on time through the mail, have people trust in that system, and things may end up going to court over it. Whereas an electronic vote, somebody could wake up at 7:30 on election morning, have a cup of coffee, download their ballot, cast that ballot electronically. It's in the clerk's hands, and they go on, read the paper, and that evening at 7:30, the polls closed, everything's tabulated electronically, and you have your results. No issues about something arriving late or being postmarked or signed and so forth. And that's where we're working on this together. Another scenario of that real quick is with Harvard, the Belfer Center. They had a program, Defending Digital Democracy, and it was headed by Robbie Mook, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, and Matt Rhodes, who was Mitt Romney's campaign manager. So a Republican on one side, a Democrat on the other. and they worked collaboratively and brought us up. We were one of the initial states that were brought into this process. And then we brought that training back, and I taught that training here to the 55 county clerks. And so I would argue that West Virginia has the best trained clerks of everybody in the United States due to this collaborative bipartisan effort up at Harvard University. They also brought in the 300 agencies, DHS. You've heard a lot about that here in just the last day or two, DHS, FBI, CIA, all the 300 agencies, Facebook, Google, Twitter. So all of this corporate America and the security apparatus of the United States all working together to improve elections in a bipartisan nature. So if you've been turned off because of the negativity in the political world, know that there's an awful lot of bipartisanship work that's going on behind the scenes. It's like that duck who looks calm on the outside, but under the water paddling like crazy. There's a lot of paddling like crazy going on behind the scenes that you can be a part of, whether you decide to put your name out there as a candidate or work on a campaign or work behind the scenes at, say, one of these think tanks that's helping our democracy overall. So again, I'd be glad to discuss it further. I could talk ad nauseum, but I know we're limited on time. Thanks, Rocky.
I think that is such a great note for us to think about, is that paddling under the water furiously toward a bipartisan set of solutions. I know, you know, in our household, we talk to our kids about finding paths forward and finding solutions together. And it's nice to hear that there's some optimism around that, again, that next chapter for us, both as a state, but also nationally, when we stack hands and do things in a way that's really aimed at those solutions and not aimed at each other. So thanks for that note. Very good. And let me turn now, based on what we just heard from Secretary Warner about the political process and getting involved and the strength of West Virginians' involvement and engagement historically, but also looking at how we bring different voices into the fold today. I want to turn to Delegate Brown. Delegate Brown, thank you so much for being here. We know you're very busy, both with your job at the National Guard, and we want to hear a little bit about that, as well as your role as delegate in the upcoming session and policy making that you'll be diving into. You know, one of the things that I'll note about women's suffrage and celebrating this 100 years is it was for some women. It wasn't for all women. We make these incremental steps forward, and each time we celebrate that and we take stock of how can we do better? How can we get more inclusive? How can we bring more voices in? So tell us, Delegate Brown, you know, about your background, how I know Secretary Warner said it's no longer feels like an aberration to find a woman as a role model. I think that's true in some places. In some places, it still may be something that we have to work at. I know my daughter is immediately aware if there is not an equal number of men and women or girls and boys. And I've said this before, my son, when he was 2, said, "Mommy, can boys be doctors too?" Because every one of his doctors and dentists were women. So there you go, Dr. Law. But we know there's still work to be done, and we don't shy away from that even as we celebrate our victories and our accomplishments. So Delegate Brown, tell us about how you got to this position, your advice for others, and the importance of having those voices in the political process.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rocky. I mean, did I pay you to set me up in such a good way? Like, we're going right into some of the talking points. I am Delegate Sammi Brown. I had, ladies and gentlemen, the honor and privilege of representing the 65th District. I was born and raised here in West Virginia. Charlestown is my hometown, and I like to really tout that I had the honor of representing the community that raised me, and it's very, very true. So how did I get here is probably the best way to kick this off. The reality is I'm clearly an interracial female, so we had different cultures in my family, different faiths in my family, and very different political affiliations. In fact, I am the only registered Democrat in my own family. But in that time, I became an organizer. I was very much involved from gosh, I've been an organizer since 17 years old, getting folks registered to vote, organizing them around respective causes. And I personally have a passion around what's called the safety net. And that's truly SNAP, temporary assistance for needy families, components that lift up folks that have a little less, and creating some equitable spaces. And that's truly been a theme throughout my tenure, not only as an elected, but then the ventures that I take on outside of the quote unquote political arena. You did mention my service in the Guard. I was appointed, although I did not make this public, but this feels like a cool space to do so. About a year ago, I was appointed to Public Affairs Officer. I had some wonderful recommendations. We interviewed beautifully, and I did achieve that appointment with the Air National Guard. It follows along a tradition within my family. Again, all the men in my family served, but I was the first girl, and we have a long history of the gentleman having served in both the Air Force and the Army. So after I complete my commission, which I'm sure the secretary knows that it takes a while to complete your commission and to become an officer. But as I'm wrapping that up, post-campaign and post-election cycle, I hope to report back to you soon that I will be Lieutenant Sammi Brown, which is very, very cool. So when I think about what it means to serve, it truly is an act of selflessness. It's not about you or even your purview. And I can tell you that some of the awards and the accomplishments and all of those wonderful things that have happened over the past several years for me, I have been lifted up in progressive spaces. I've seen as a top line for individuals that are legislators to watch, electeds to watch, young elected officials to watch. But none of that matters if we're not taking care of the people, and particularly here in West Virginia, if you're not acting in a holistic way to lift up the voices of your community, if you're not lifting up the voices of West Virginians as a whole, you're missing the mark. It truly is an act of service above self. And so that's how I really wanted to approach the work. And in that time, the policies that I introduced ranged from creating a sexual assault survivors bill of rights to creating second look sentencing, which also was lifted up nationally, to also creating spaces in which we're doing paid family leave, making sure that there is an extension of SNAP benefits to individuals that have served their time but are now looking to reintegrate into the communities and get back on their feet and live a good life, or try to do right by their communities after having a transgression, whatever that case may be. And again, lifting up the voices that didn't feel like they had that space, which speaks on a lot of levels, whether you're thinking about economic development, whether you're thinking about rehabilitation, or what some folks like to refer to as social issues, but I personally find it to be civil and human rights. So what does that mean for women as a whole? The 19th Amendment, and we did touch on this briefly, it did not give the right to vote to all women. In fact, it would be another equal rights movement and the civil rights movement that would make sure that women of color would also have that same equitable space to be able to cast their vote and have their voices heard. And that's huge, it's paramount, but it also speaks to how we evolve and create process or progress within our electoral process as a whole. And you're starting to see that play out and transpire. I would have to say, since I have personally gotten to the elected officials arena, which has really been since 2015, 2016, when I first started running, and that was in my 20s. You see how the rhetoric shifts. You see how policies that are top of mind for folks are changing. You're also seeing folks that are starting to comprehend components of a justice space. So it's not just about climate change, Now we're talking about environmental justice. It's not just about human rights, or are we lifting up some of those individuals that feel like they are from marginalized communities. It's, are we creating justice? And it's been something that is really grabbing hold, but you're also kind of seeing it come to a head nationally. And then how does West Virginia play out into that? I personally think that because we've been a space and a state that has spearheaded activism and advocacy, we really were at the forefront of making sure that workers' rights was tantamount for what we would speak to in our government and through governance, that we have an opportunity to be leaders in that as well, in a time that we are now really seeing some intersectionality and a clash as a result. I'll also say, and I feel like I should probably wrap this up in a nice tight bow and then address questions. But right now, we had our Democratic Women's Caucus. There were 8 of us. I believe the Secretary said 17 as a whole for a Women's Caucus in just the House of Delegates alone. And I would say that out of a 100-person body, not quite representative of the people of West Virginia, right? So if 51% of our population are women, well, we cannot rest until our electoral bodies really look and sound and feel like the population that West Virginia is. I'd love to see 50-50, but we'll see how we can really make those strides towards progress here in the coming years. The advice that I would give to women, young women, and individuals that are looking to break down the barriers and some of the walls in order to create a true representative government. You are going to have a thick skin, but I'll tell you this, that if you lead with transparency and you lead with heart, regardless of how there will be differences, and you're not going to agree with me at all times, and you shouldn't. That's not how government works. That's not how representation works. But if you're willing to lead in your most authentic self, if you're willing to share of yourself and create a space where there is an exchange of lived experiences, you can truly create policy that enacts change. And what I mean by that is when we're drafting bills and we're drafting laws, it's not just about the top lines. It's not about the title. It's about what the body of that language does that can enact change. And what we want to do is make it comprehensive, interactive, and a coalition of very diverse figures that can make sure that we're doing the very best possible for the people of West Virginia. And so I'm excited to see how that comes to pass in the coming years. This coming cycle, this coming session, I will not be there. I was unsuccessful in my race. I may have outtrended the top of my Democratic ticket, but I did lose by a 1% margin. And again, that speaks to perseverance. It speaks to a different type of leadership. It matters how you show up when you win. It also matters how you show up when you lose. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to tell you that there's a lot of ways to be engaged in this process. You can still speak your truth and truth to power, but also even when you have a hiccup or you have a bump in the road, that doesn't mean your journey's over. It also means that there's something that to be learned from that experience, how you can engage still, and that your space and relevance is not diminished in one instance. There's still plenty of space to lead and go forward and do good work. So be prepared for that. Be prepared that if you are truly heart-centric and you're ready to lead and create change and to do the very best for a collective, and in our case, it's the people of West Virginia, that if you are truly sincere about that venture and that journey, it's not going to be a straight path. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's a straight line to victory. Sometimes it's a little bumpy and curvy. But if you're willing to be introspective and you're willing to take the collaborative effort and the exchanges from those around you, work in a bipartisan manner, see perspectives that aren't of your own, you're going to get there and it's going to be just fine. And people need your voice. The people of West Virginia absolutely need your voice. So welcome to the arena. Thanks, Rocky. Any questions?
Do we have Rocky? Yeah, we have Rocky. Rocky, you're on mute.
Here she is.
So sorry. I do have one question, and we'll pitch this to the panelists for your generous welcoming of their questions as well. But, you know, they say once you're a judge or a coach, you get to keep that title forever. So we should always bestow you with the title delegate, but you also get the highest title. So you'll have to tell us which one is higher, lieutenant or delegate. We'll have to go forward. And I appreciate and wanted to just highlight that in the conversations leading up to today, the Delegate Brown was always really passionate, as you heard today, but also moving forward. So when we hear from Priscila Santos, for example, on some of those same issues, those policy issues that we just heard you talking about, you don't have any intention of putting that down. And so as we prepare for the next few months, I know that you have rolled up your sleeves and you're going to continue that work. And so we thank you for that definition of public service that you shared with us, and your ongoing commitment to public service. So let me turn this over to your great offer for your panelists to ask any follow-up questions that they may have.
Absolutely.
Delegate Brown, I have a question. So I also am from West Virginia. I'm from Southern West Virginia. And so I think you mentioned that you've been involved since you were 17.
Yes. Yes.
How did, if you're thinking about speaking to kind of the parents out here, the moms, the dads, or even younger women and men about how to get involved that early, what would you say to them?
Be as fearless as your child. It was very much, and I have to be very direct with you. It was my grandmother that told my parents, she's fearless. You cannot stop her. This is what she's meant to be. So you have one of two options: be a part of that and support her, or she's going to leave you behind. She was my best friend. I miss her every day, and I can only imagine what she would be saying if I got to share this experience with her. But she was very much someone that had grounded me in this sense of deep faith, but then also that if you're going to do this, sometimes it won't be pretty. It's not all rainbows and butterflies, but if you are passionate and these are your convictions, then do your research, have the full breadth of knowledge, and go forth in a way that others want to join you. They want to do this with you too. The other part that I would say as moms and dads or as caregivers, prepare them for some of the rhetoric. Sometimes it hurts. And especially if you are someone that leads from here, it can erode at that passion. Sometimes it feels very discouraging. And as someone that loves them and wants to see them do well, sometimes it's just a matter of letting them come home to you and tell you, Mom, God, today sucked. It hurt. It broke my heart. And you tell them that that's part of the journey. And it makes for a hell of a comeback later. It's all, every great hero's journey has that one part, and just remind them of that.
I love it. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
I might jump in for just a minute if I could.
Sure.
All I wanted to do is say, don't ever either underestimate or close down a young child's initiative. In my own family, my daughter decided at 5 years old where she was going to go to college. Sure enough, she did. Just met a representative last night elected at the age of 19. He decided when he was 5 years old he was going to be into politics. I said, well, did you get involved in student government? No, this was just his first time at running, and he got elected. Just time and time again, we have a wonderful young delegation under 30 here in West Virginia, and we again, setting records here in West Virginia. Sarah Blair was the youngest person in the history of the United States, going all the way back to George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, youngest person ever elected to House of Delegates. Sarah Blair, right here in West Virginia from the Eastern Panhandle. Caleb Hanna right now. I think he's the youngest African-American serving in the delegation, or at least he was when he was elected. So a tremendous tradition here. And of course, we all know about Senator Jennings Randolph was the one who was behind the 26th Amendment to give 18-year-olds the right to vote from West Virginia. So there's a legacy here of encouraging young people to be involved and let them be a part of that, teach them that legacy that we have. And that may help encourage them along the way. At the same time, I love the story of Shelley Moore Capito talking about when she became a Republican. It was after she got her first paycheck and she thought she was going to get paid $1,000 a month. And when that paycheck showed up, it was $667. They'd taken a third of it out for the various taxes and so forth. She said, that's the day I became a Republican. So sometimes you need those life experiences. I love to encourage young people to be involved, but we also need people all the way up through. We need senior citizens being involved in the political process as well. That's what I wanted to get back to from earlier is we need people across the spectrum. It doesn't matter race, color, age, sex, whatever. We need everybody involved so that we can represent, back to Sammy's point, if you need to lift up the voice of the community that you come from your life experiences, and we'll all be better for that. Thanks.
That's great. And I'm writing these things down as a mom to try to put on the refrigerator and to live by. That's such good advice, and from both of you, and Delegate Brown, the passion with which you share that advice is wonderful. It's also a perfect segue to Dr. Law, who I know spends lots of time with people talking through those difficult challenges. And certainly during the time of COVID, where we've had a lot to think about this year, the global pandemic, the crunch of logistics that means for not just moms and kids with school, but across the board, employers, employees. It just seems like from every angle, there's a lot going on. We do see some disproportionate impact on women, whether it's the pink collar recession, where we know that sectors in which we have more women working are sometimes the hardest hit for layoffs. We also know that there's a disproportionate share of some of the domestic or household duties that are still taken by women, and the crunch of having schools shut down or working at home or trying to navigate a lot more than we maybe had been in the past, as well as trying to stay safe, is incredibly difficult. So those perspectives, Secretary and Delegate, to make sure that they're bringing to the table is important, but also knowing how to approach people when they have those stressors. As you were saying, when somebody comes home at the end of the day, what do you tell them? How do you know when to get help for yourself or for those that you love? And where do you get that help? You know, Sarah Payne, thank you so much for hosting this. I know when Sarah and I were putting together a conversation back in September, we talked about the title for one of the panels should be "The Struggle is Real." This stuff, there's a lot. Right? There's a lot going on, and we should validate that and say that out loud. It's great to tough it out. It's great for mountaineers to kind of go first and to get through everything. But every once in a while, you need to ask for help. So Dr. Law, let's turn this over to you, and perfect segue, Delegate, and let's hear from you. All of us probably personally have either ourselves or others in our orbit who could get your advice about where to get help and how to approach this year.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Rocky. And I am honored to be a panelist with these wonderful folks, and also just to be speaking with you all. You know, I think you're 100% right. This year, we have seen jokes about everything from, you know, anxiety to not having toilet paper to really very real, horrible situations, whether it's concerns about becoming sick, folks being isolated, being stuck at home, not going to school, not having food, being stuck at home in abusive situations, not being employed, having financial difficulties, childcare needs. I mean, it's just, the stressors have gone through the roof. And so because of that, we see this massive increase in need for mental health services in adults, women, men, children. And I think especially in West Virginia, it's really difficult for some to access those. And I think that's a variety. There's a variety of etiologies behind that. As I said, I'm born and raised in Bluefield. And so I think that I was brought up with grandparents who are very stoic, very pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of folks. And so when you think about reaching out, asking for help, talking about mental health of all things, it's tough. And that's if you're lucky enough to be in a place where you have someone that you can reach out to. I think what you said is important, Rocky, is that, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but I think it is really important for all of us to just recognize how difficult this is for women specifically. Even just in some of the research since COVID-19 has sort of presented itself, there was a Kaiser poll that showed that, when they asked women versus men, women, 53% of them talked about how COVID-19 had a significant negative impact on their mental health compared to 37% of men. Woo. Well, that's an enlightening fact. There was a study that talked about women, especially those that do not have a college degree, had more job loss sustained from April to date than men through COVID. And of course, like you mentioned, 2 out of 3 caregivers right now in the US are women. So when you take all of that together, whether it's childcare responsibilities, family responsibilities, caring for incapacitated adults, and then not being able to access other resources because you're afraid that you'll get them sick if they're older parents. It leads to a culmination of almost a mental health crisis. So when I think about what I would tell folks, whether it's, how do you ask for help or how do you recognize others that aren't asking? First, I think it's important to really familiarize yourself with what you're looking for. You know yourself best, you know your loved ones and friends best. So when something about them seems off, trust your gut. We aren't seeing each other with the frequency that we did before. We're not going to the store, church, work, all the places that we would have run into folks before. So don't be afraid to reach out to someone and let them know that you care and let them know that you're worried. I think it's just as important to reach out and ask for help as it is to check in on other people, because folks are pretty stoic. There are going to be a lot of folks who aren't going to ask for help. They may have an empty fridge. They may have no money in their bank account and they're not going to ask for help. So I think it's not just important to reach out once, but to reach out consistently. I'm not saying that we should stalk people, but I do think it's important if you check in on the people you love. I think when I think about for that, even for myself in my house, it's important when you think about your own mental health to really be okay with setting boundaries. Set boundaries both about kind of how you connect with other people and what you choose to connect with. So in an election year and in a year with a pandemic, it is really important to prioritize how you're accessing the news, online resources, social media. I tell lots of folks who are saying, man, I can't sleep. You really probably shouldn't scroll through your phone at night when you're laying there in bed before you go to sleep, because you're hit with really heavy topics. So don't do it before bed. Pick your times, limit the amount of news you watch, set an egg timer and go with it. And let that be that. And then really try to backfill with other things that you enjoy that are going to be okay with, that are going to prioritize taking care of yourself. It's okay to set boundaries with other people. So you call the person to check in on them and tell them that you love them. And then they want to talk about COVID or the election the whole time. It's very okay to think in your brain, I am so glad we're talking. And I wanted to ask you about this. I think it's important to set a schedule and stick to it, whether you're at home and you are the person trying to be the virtual teacher, and it's like Little House on the Prairie, you're teaching all kinds of different ages of children, and also trying to do your own work. Try to set a schedule. It's easier to take care of our physical and mental health when the day is predictable. I think it's very okay to prioritize yourself. We're raised in a society where I started with telling you to check in on other people, but you can't. It's a kid's book that my kids have been read in school. You can't fill someone else's bucket until you fill your own, right? You have to be filled first. So you have to eat. Having regular sleep is important. I love telemedicine. That's what my passion is, to give care to people in areas where they don't have it. And it is still important to go to the doctor. Most people say, I don't want to go. They're going to call me. It's fine. It is okay to prioritize going to the doctor and taking care of your basic health, because if you're healthy, you're going to be able to take care of everything you need to, and also be less likely to sort of get sick yourself. Go outside, take a walk, take a breath of fresh air without a mask on if you're socially distanced. Do something active. It's been amazing to me what now has sort of been online. I feel like you can log onto YouTube and find yoga. You can find all kinds of things that before you would have had to have paid to have a membership to go and take part in. If you work, whether it's from home or you're trying to balance working outside of the home and with what's going on inside of your home, I think a lot of employers now, there's no harm in asking. So I think that just as much as it's important to prioritize yourself, it's important to prioritize and advocate for yourself. So asking your employer, can I flex my schedule? Can I work 3 10s or 4 10s instead of 5 days a week, so that I can figure out how to take care of my kids at home, or so I can be present in another way. So I think those are some really basic, important things, just that don't require money, that are just sort of us reframing how we look at how we take care of ourselves. I do think, though, as I mentioned, it isn't sunshine and rainbows. There's really very little good that's come out of COVID-19, but I do think one positive has been increasing sort of the spotlight on mental health, recognizing whether we're talking about it or not, it's there. It's an important priority, and we need the resources for them. And so a lot of places have really beefed up their online presence, their accessibility for folks, which is just critical. I think it's really important because there are a lot of ways to access them. So even if you're a person that does not have a smartphone, does not have internet at your house, does not have a computer or internet, there are still even telephone supports that have been beefed up. So when I think, and I'm happy to talk with anybody or provide resources to share to the group afterwards, but all comers are not equal online. That my daughter told me the other day that she was horrified that Wikipedia wasn't right about something. So she, I think ones that really are reliable, there's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the NAMI websites. They have a helpline for local resources. They have a crisis text line. So this is a 24/7 crisis text line. You can text 741-741 and reach out to folks. Even though West Virginia itself doesn't have a state NAMI right now, there are local affiliates, and they can help you access more regional care. There's the SAMHSA website, which is SAMHSA. Tons of online, either 12-step programs or social support programs. I think that's really, really key. This morning in my clinic, just before I joined in, I met a gentleman that had been furloughed in March and then ultimately was terminated in May. He's a coal miner, and he began to drink heavily after he was furloughed because he felt like he wasn't kind of tending to his family's needs as much. He had no idea that there were as many online resources and support as there are. So, but wouldn't have felt comfortable in his own community to access those there, both from a health pandemic side of things, but then also just generally feeling comfortable and non-stigmatized. So there are all kinds of online 12-step programs. There's a bunch of them listed on the DHHR website within West Virginia, but I'm happy to provide those as well. And then there are a bunch of phone helplines. There's a suicide prevention helpline. There are treatment referral helplines. There's even an emotional strength warm line for West Virginia residents, 24/7, that you can call. That's just a non-crisis emotional support line. So again, all these things that if you're stuck at home, there are ways to reach out. I also think if you know, when you think about technology and mental health and accessing health, especially if we can't get out of our homes, for those who do have smartphones, tons of apps now, some of which are free, some of which have memberships, but there are ones that kind of work on meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, sleep. You know, I don't advocate any of them. I can give names just from experience. Some are Calm, Headspace, Talkspace. There's even, what is it called? The 10% Happiest Coronavirus Sanity Guide. You know, there's lots of things that you can have that have access to free podcasts, those sorts of things. Not directly connecting with a person, but helping you have access to resources that are therapeutic, that may be helpful when you feel alone. And then I think kind of finally, I'd probably be remiss if I overlooked and didn't talk about really formally accessing care. I think that because of the public health emergency, a lot of practices, whether it's therapists, whether it's physicians of any kind, are now offering telehealth options in terms of how you can connect to your provider from your home. In the legislative session right before COVID, it was really timely, the patient home, at least for behavioral health issues, became an appropriate site to have telehealth care. Before that, it wasn't. Now it is because of the public health emergency. But what I think is really cool about that is that it allows patients to access resources that either weren't geographically feasible before or weren't financially feasible from an insurance side of things. So if there are people who say, you know, I would love to see a therapist, I would love to, you know, I've had an eating disorder all my life, I'd love to have treatment for this. I have, you know, an alcohol problem and I'd love to have treatment for this. I have depression and I can't leave my house. There are a lot of practices now, ones that are 4 hours from your home that still take patients and you don't have to drive there. So I would encourage people to reach out to specialists. A lot of folks are now having openings because people aren't coming in, because they're canceling. And so I would just say, you know, I encourage folks to really embrace the opportunity to take care of yourself because you deserve it. And we can't take care of the rest of our families if we don't take care of ourselves. So with that, I can take any questions, and again, happy to provide any resources, but I'm just honored to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Law. That was tremendously helpful. And we know Dr. Law is the medical director for the Telepsychiatry line for the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute. And that has a really big footprint. The behavioral medicine services from the Rockefeller Neuroscience Institute really reach all over the region. And so maybe just one quick follow-up, if you could speak to the numbers. I think that validation that Sarah and I were talking about sort of more casually about the struggle is real, or understanding what sometimes underneath these challenges. That sometimes when you look at the numbers, it really feels more concrete and validating. And I know you just mentioned whether it was changes in the legislative policy on the state level or federal level, the ability to reach people by different kinds of methodologies in their own homes has been really important. But what have you seen as far as numbers during COVID and sort of after the shutdowns?
So I will, I think generally, and then specifically, I can talk about it. I think that before the shutdowns, we had here in Morgantown at the hospital here, we were full. We have lots of patients. We need more providers because the need is high. And when the pandemic hit and when things sort of reverted, and we switched to really all telehealth, we saw a very brief dip and then a parallel line that kind of almost mimicked the line of infections within West Virginia in terms of the folks that are reaching out. And I think the things that have been most powerful for me have been the demographics of folks that are reaching out. I think that there are those who have chronic mental illness that we have seen and have been lucky enough to treat and be a part of their lives the whole time, that have stayed in treatment. I think there are those that had not before, college students who are displaced, who are anxious to be out of their dorm room, that are now reaching out and saying, I'm not with my family. I'm really anxious. And what do I do? I think the other piece is that, so we have an intensive outpatient program in the southern part of the state, in the Southern Highlands catchment area in Mercer, McDowell, and Wyoming counties. And some of the patients that we treat there suffer from both mental illness and substance use disorder. And for those folks, they talked about, at a lot of points, the mental health centers were closed, where they were furloughing folks because we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know if it was safe to bring patients in. So how do you reach people? We had people driving to their local McDonald's to access Wi-Fi in order to establish treatment and to continue treatment. And so I think it speaks to the drive that folks have had to get treatment despite the odds. So I would say that we've probably seen, just in answer to your question, within this building, typically we have about 1,800 visits scheduled a week. I would say that last week we had 2,300 visits scheduled, and that's just in this building. That doesn't speak to all the other areas of the state. It doesn't speak to the mental health centers, to the other hospitals, to the private practices. So I think we know that the mental health crisis that's coming along with the COVID-19 pandemic is real. And I hope for some it normalizes the idea that it's okay to reach out.
Thank you. That's really helpful. So the struggle is real. You're not alone. And there's a path to get help. I think those takeaways are really important, and understanding and putting a name on some of those stressors that are happening this year really helps us not only to seek help for ourselves or our family members, but to also maybe start to think, you mentioned earlier, some of those changes in your environment or your home that you do have control over, to move in that direction of being solutions oriented where you have control. One of the things that does feel like you don't have a lot of control, or at least I will say this, as a mom and somebody who's working from home these days, is childcare and school, and the stressors of having everybody not knowing who's going to be able to get on to school, to their remote learning. Are the schools going to be shut down? Are they safe at school? What do those childcare facilities look like? And we know that that weighs heavily on parents, on teachers, on the daycare providers and employers as well, who rely on that. It's a workforce enabler. So I want to pivot now to Priscila Santos, who might be able to bring us home on this conversation a little bit with some concrete things that we could do. If you're going to vote, as we heard Secretary Warner talking about, go to the polls and vote and shape policy. Or if you're going to do as Delegate Brown did, which is to roll up your sleeves and go in there and run for office and have a voice in policy. Or if you're going to do as Dr. Law has indicated and start to really understand what sometimes underneath those societal changes or improvements that we want to look at, whether it's making sure that we're offering telemedicine or making sure that we're clear on some of the stressors that perhaps government has a role, or businesses and individuals have a role in improving and mitigating some of those barriers and challenges to everyday life. That childcare is something that you've picked up on, and I know I've been looking at for a couple of years. So it's timely that your research in looking at this as a workforce enabler is primed and ready to go. So Priscila, if you're going to inform those policymakers out there who are going to vote or run for office or identify in their own lives what needs to change, tell us a few things about the delivery of childcare that we could improve upon, where we know right now childcare providers are really strapped. There's not a whole lot of money out there to pay employees. We know that there's a big need for parents and caregivers to have a safe, available, affordable place for their kids to go. And that there's a lot of uncertainty to go back in and out the additional PPE and regulations, sometimes even knowing week to week what is permissible for caregivers is a challenge. And that's all on top of the fact that this was a tough industry to begin with razor thin margins. And you can't really put a whole lot more on parents to pay exorbitant prices or to have quality of care go down. So you've been looking at this. Let's bring us home here and talk about those policy suggestions or best practices where we can really improve upon that one particular stressor.
Thank you, Rocky, for this introduction, and also Sarah and Brittany for this opportunity. I think those are all very important questions. And some of the things we hear sometimes is that and not all people who are in the workforce or even wanting to join the workforce have children. So for this reason, sometimes we as society might be inclined to think that the childcare issue should be something that only concerns maybe the childcare providers or working parents, but that's definitely not the case. But before I go into that, I think I'll just start with a very brief overview of why childcare is so expensive in West Virginia, in the United States. I think it's important to start with that because not all people in this meeting might be familiar with those issues. So just starting with like a brief overview of the numbers. Between the 1970s and the early 2000s, we know that childcare costs have increased 2,000% in the United States, and it's so hard for us to wrap our heads around such a huge increase. But research shows that childcare costs have increased faster than virtually every other consumer good or service that the government tracks during this 40-year period. And we also know that since the 1990s, childcare costs have grown twice as fast as the overall inflation. So we all might be thinking, why is childcare so expensive, or why has childcare become so expensive? So there are essentially two main drivers of childcare program expenses. So number one is staff salaries. They usually account for between 66 and 80% of program expenses. And number two is compliance with regulatory requirements. So childcare is unlike any other industry that can maybe reduce costs or spending by outsourcing. So sometimes they decide to move labor to other countries that pay less to workers, or even by replacing human workers with machines like some car companies do. But childcare, of course, you cannot do that. We know that it's labor intensive. It requires lots of trained workers to keep up with regulations, especially the staff to child ratios that we have here in West Virginia and all over the country. And since staff salaries are the #1 drivers of cost, one may think that child care workers make a lot of money, but that's not the case. In West Virginia, for example, they make between $15,000 and $20,000 a year with no benefits. They also need to go through training for early care and education, and training takes several months to be completed. They need to cook, they need to clean, even more now with COVID. They need to care for children, nurture children, and especially they also need to educate them at a crucial age. So it is essentially a demanding job that doesn't pay very much. It's much easier to work at a restaurant. You're gonna make more and not gonna have to go through training or all of those, meet all of those regulatory requirements. And this ultimately leads to a high turnover rate in the field, which is between 25 and 40%. And on the flip side, the providers have two main sources of revenue. So they have parent tuition and they have subsidies from the state and federal government. The subsidies only apply for children who qualify for such programs. And as you all can imagine, these sources of revenue, unfortunately, are by no means enough to cover the true cost of providing care. And just as an example, if child care providers were to charge parents who are private pay the true cost of caring for infants, it would cost them over $2,000 a month. So instead, what providers do, they charge what caregivers or parents are able to pay, and then they come up with creative ways to make up for the rest, like they rely on in-kind donations. Sometimes they are able to get reduced or free rent, and some of them also engage in extensive fundraising efforts to cover the remaining costs. So as Rocky said, they operate on thin margins, and many are forced to close doors because of that. And as a consequence, we have a shortage of such services in West Virginia. And if you couple all of those factors with the financial strain brought about COVID on providers, we know that we now have an even lower number of providers in the state. So between July of 2019 and September of 2020, we lost almost 600 providers. So we cannot attribute all of that to COVID, but we know that in large part, yes, that was the reason. Because if you like are operating on a check by check, you cannot afford to close, not even for 1, 2, 3 weeks, much less months. And so this also contributes for us to have a lower number of providers, although we gained about 200 providers during this time period. If you do the math, we lost 400 providers. So many parents and caregivers want to join the workforce. Not all of them do, but for those who want to join the workforce, sometimes they are not able to because they cannot find childcare services or afford them. But answering the question I posed at the beginning, so why should we as a society be concerned about families with children who want to join the workforce? I was reading this interesting article this week that was talking about the notion that families should be responsible for paying for their own children. And I know that is a harsh argument, but sometimes we do hear that, like in my case, for example, I do not have children, so why should we as a society, or me, should be worried about that as well? And then I'd like to touch on main three arguments that discredit this notion. So if we remove all the polite terms that are often used to make these arguments softer, it comes down to the notion that having children is a lifestyle choice or even a consumption choice, like buying a BMW or buying a Prius. Like some families have 1 children, some have 2 or more, and some families have none. So if having children is a personal decision, why should others in society need to act to make that sure that parents who need childcare are able to find and afford those services? So the first thing I'd like to highlight is that most Americans accept and even demand that public subsidy of education from the moment a child turns 5 and enters kindergarten to the day they graduate from a community college or a public university. So we don't see any pushes at a state or federal level to abolish public schools. So we can safely say that we as a society have agreed that all people have the right to have access to education. But for some reason, from birth to about age 5, we leave parents to figure it out, early care and education arrangements on their own. And this is right around the time that they are just starting their careers and are able to pay for care, which is more expensive when children are younger. And West Virginia is one of the states in which it is cheaper to pay in-state tuition for a freshman than paying childcare at a center for an infant. And so we cannot also neglect the importance of investments in early care and education. We have several professionals like psychologists, neuroscientists that have long established that the first 5 years of a child's life are crucial for the development of several important skills for their success later in life, and that early education has profound effects on all of those skills. And other research that shows the achievement gap can be cut by half if we are able to provide the quality child care to young children. And I'm talking about the achievement gap between Black and white kindergarten. And like, I would say that in that sense, the first 5 years are foundational to the development of skills necessary for success in school and health and career and in life. And we as a society understand the importance of education for those who are 5 and up, but we also need to recognize the importance of providing education for children who are 5 and under. And childcare is also an excellent economic investment. In 2015, the Council of Economic Advisors, which is a federal agency that advises the President of the United States on economic policy, wrote that for every $1 that are spent on childcare programs, it results in almost $9 of societal benefits. So in about half of which comes from increased earnings for children when they grow up, and of course to their families. I'll just share my screen very briefly to show you guys a graph of the, I think I'm not able to, I'm not the host, sorry. So I would just wanted to show a graph that shows the return on investment to investing in early caring education and then job training for post-secondary. So it's like the graph essentially does this. And it shows that the return on investment on job training and any type of training like post-secondary, it's lower than when you start at a very early age. I'm not talking about the fact that we need to stop focusing on post-secondary job training, but also to prioritize the early ages. So essentially, it is a smart investment for us as a society. It has a high return on cost in the form of taxes and societal benefits. And all West Virginians stand to gain when there is a well-trained and prosperous workforce and able to pay taxes and support our social programs in the future. And we all tend to gain when children are well educated and become qualified workers. And the last argument I'd like to make is that access to affordable and quality childcare also benefits parents directly today through the wages they earn. They are able to provide for their families, and they also benefit to society through the taxes they're paid by those parents. And we all know that a larger tax base usually translates into lower taxes to everyone. So essentially, childcare needs should be addressed by society as a whole and not only be a concern of providers and working parents or caregivers. And as far as solutions to increasing the supply of childcare in West Virginia, I think being like a rural state, we have an excellent opportunity to better meet the demands of working families and employers by investing in launching childcare business from within people's homes. So in doing that, I think collaboration and communication is also key. And when I mean collaboration, I mean among parents, providers, regulators, local governments, employers, local businesses, and community members as a whole. So research essentially shows that, okay, we need more childcare, but not launching a childcare center is not always the right solution for all communities, because those usually work in large urban areas when you have children who are dropped off and picked up at a set time, like for parents that have a 9 to 5. But for other situations, it's usually not ideal. For rural or more remote areas, the best solution is usually to have a supply of in-home providers in key locations. And those providers are able to offer more flexible arrangements, like care for the children of parents who work evenings, weekends, and those settings are also more compact. So the family child care facilities serve up to 12 children, and family child care homes serve up to 6 children. So I think there is an opportunity for us to better meet the demand for such services, especially with stay-at-home parents who would like to supplement their incomes. I think we have a lot of resources in the state to support those people who would like to start an in-home childcare business. So they, of course, they would have to complete training, and it is important to have early care and educational training, and then also good business management skills. But we have several resources throughout the state to support those. Like we have regulatory specialists with the PHHR. We have the child care resource and referral agencies that provide lots of information for people as well. In like a concrete example of something that is happening right now, and that it provides support to those who like to open a child care business, being that center or a facility or a home provider, is the Faster West Virginia initiative. So we are partnering up with Advantage Valley to put together startup guides for those who like to start those businesses. So the initiative is focused on 8 county region that covers I think the Boone, Braxton, Cabell, Clay County, Panola, Lincoln, Putnam, and Wayne. And it's targeted to either start new businesses in those counties or expanding existing businesses. And one of those key sectors is childcare. So I think that this is an excellent opportunity for those in the call who, hey, I'd like to supplement my family income. I have young children. Some government programs even allow you to receive subsidies for caring for your own children. And this program would provide like coaching, training, access to loan funds. And I think they're hosting a webinar on December 9th. So I think this would be a good opportunity to to meet the needs of working families and local employers to better support our economy. We know that I think COVID, if we could say a positive thing about COVID, is that it helps to highlight how childcare services are essential. They should be considered part of our society's infrastructure, and they need to be better supported and better funded.
That's a headline right there, Priscila. I think you just really eloquently found one of those rare silver linings to COVID. That was an amazing wrap up. So,
yes.
let me just recap real quickly, because I want to be respectful of the time that I know, Sarah, you had one more thing to cap off the day, but boy, we had a nice last panel for the Small Communities Big Solutions Conference. And I'll just go quickly and recap those big solutions. It sounds like we got advice to really celebrate our proud history, but move forward in a bipartisan way towards solutions. We heard that we needed to lift everybody's voice up and all be part of the solutions. And even when it's not easy or you get pushed to the side, to come right back at it and roll up those sleeves and stay focused on expressing your voice and lifting up those of others, that the struggle's real right now, especially for women, that you're not alone, that numbers of people who need support and assistance are on the rise, and that there is help. And in addition to going into that space where you're recognizing the help that you can get for yourself and others, that it's up to us to collectively remove some of the barriers that make it tough right now, that underscore that struggle piece. And Priscila just really gave us a masterclass and a case study of how it's important for us to all care about things that may not on its surface seem like it affects us. The fact that Priscila is now the flat out expert on this issue, and she started out by telling us, I don't have kids, but I care about this because it affects our communities and it affects our future workforce. It affects our ability to relate to one another, to solve problems, and gave us the last big solution with a nice optimistic end, Priscila, to a silver lining of COVID, which is hard to come by, but that it takes that collaborative effort from everybody involved and that creativity to create those solutions that we wouldn't otherwise think about if we were in our silos, but to see those aspects of a challenge or what should be actually an opportunity in ways that we can all reflect our own value in the solution and the return on that investment to each of us. Then we put our hands together and try to solve those problems. And some specific policy recommendations that we heard from Priscila for the upcoming legislative session on the state, local, and federal policy levels, as well as perhaps those who've been displaced from the workforce, an opportunity here coming up in the next couple of weeks to learn about a job you could create for yourself with the entrepreneurial spirit. So thank you all of for the tremendous input and advice and big solutions. And Sarah, I know we're at time here. I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rocky. What a inspiring panel and a great way to end our conference. And I appreciate the panelists very much. I mean, it's just so much great information and that we can unpack that for days to come and chew on it. And everyone, please stay safe. And we're going to continue these conversations and we want you to be a part. So stay in contact with the Alliance as we move forward. Everyone stay safe and healthy. Happy Thanksgiving.